Good morning, Science 20s. Our lesson today is on distinguishing between biotic and abiotic factors and describing how these factors will affect population size. Well, I have two lists here, and what I want us to do is to look at what's under each list and see if we can decide where we're going to put some of these extra items underneath the testers, and then we'll determine the rule for that list. So in list A, we have temperature, water, and pH. In list B, we have tree, flower, and black bear. Now, underneath these lists, we have five more words, and what we would like to do is try to determine which list would these each go on. So, if I look at topography, topography is land heights or land makeup, how the land looks when you look at it. Is it bumpy? Is it smooth? I think we would put that on my list A. Birds, I think they go over here with flowers, trees, and black bears over on B. Soil, again, over here with water, pH, temperature. Sunlight over here, and insects up here. So my question is, do we notice something similar about these six substances on list A? And if you say that they're non-living, you would be correct. So we would call these abiotic examples. Over here, tree, bird, flower, insects, black bear. These are all living things, so I would call these biotic. So let's define both of these new terms. Abiotic means the non-living components that influence and shape an ecosystem. These examples could include temperature, weather, and sunlight, or chemical and geological features like the shape of rocks, minerals, topography, to use a term from the previous slide. Biotic, on the other hand, is a living organism. If we think about the study of biology, that is the study of living things, bio meaning living. So, biotic is living organisms. This could be anything from decomposers to producers, consumers, pine trees, bacteria, animals, plants, fish, birds, anything that's considered living. Well, what I would like us to do is let's watch this short little goofy little advertise and let's see if we can come up with four examples of abiotic and four examples of biotic factors from this commercial.
At the river mouth, the bears catch only the tastiest, most tender salmon, which is exactly what we at John West want. John West endured the worst to bring you the best.
So if I think of the video, I always think that the biotic factors are the easiest, the living things. And so let's write down a few that we saw. I would think everybody agree a bear has to hit our list. Human has to hit our list. Given they were fighting over the salmon, it should hit our list. Then we have grasses that I can still see in the video. We have trees that I can still see in the video. If I think of abiotic, well, we have the stream, so that would be water. It looks like we have some rocks or pebbles in the stream there. We have the weather. It's very nice out. It's clear, so clouds or weather. That sort of thing. And then, of course, there would, of course, be dirt, mud, sand. Those are all non-living features. Now, I'd like you to look at the picture. First off, does anybody know where this is? And then secondly, can we name two biotic and two abiotic factors from this location? Now, this place has a deep meaning to me because I actually, this is where I proposed to my wife. We were in Waterton and we climbed up to Bears Hump. And while we were overlooking the town site is when I proposed. We then went here and took some pictures at the hotel afterwards. But that just has some special memory in my household. So, to me, abiotic factors, we have clouds, we have weather, we have rock, we have water. Biotic factors, we have grasses, we have trees, we have deers, we have humans, we have bunny rabbits, those sorts of things. This second photo is also a place dear to my heart. I lived there for 6 years. This is Lethbridge, of course, Lethbridge, Alberta. So if I was to pick out abiotic features from this picture, I would think of the roadways. I would think of the electrical lines. I would think of here is my train bridge, that suspension bridge that goes across Whoop Up Drive. There's cement pads and there's rocks. Some biotic factors looking at this would be trees and grasses and shrubs. There's a few people over here. All of those are living things. So let's define a few terms. And I know we've defined these before in previous courses, but let's define them again to make sure they're clear. An ecosystem is all the organisms in an area as well as the abiotic non-living factors with which they interact. So this is Idaho Peak, Slocan Valley, British Columbia. So mountains would be considered an ecosystem. Other ecosystems, or if we're thinking of categories, could be freshwater ecosystem, or it might be a deciduous forest ecosystem, meaning trees that lose their leaves, compared to a coniferous forest where all of the trees are things like Christmas trees, where they all have their cones and hold on to their pine needles. Could be desert, could be tundra, those sorts of things. While on the other hand, a habitat is all of the living biotic and non-living abiotic factors that are present to allow a habitat to survive. So it takes into account everything that allows for survival. Because remember, in these places, they are trying to reproduce so that grass has more grass, birds have more birds, the living features, and they are there for survival. Now, given an ecosystem could contain many different habitats. So if we said a mountain region, right, as our ecosystem, mountains, in that habitat, in that ecosystem, there could be a habitat of coniferous forest. There could be another habitat on that same mountain of, let's say, a freshwater stream habitat, where we're going to get a lot of different biotic and abiotic factors inside the stream. That is the biggest difference. So let's look at a plant, for example. This looks kind of like a hosta, but I don't think it is because it's got a star pattern on the leaf. So what abiotic factors might be included in their habitat? So what is it? What non-living things are important in a habitat for plants? Well, one of the things that might be important might be what the soil is made up of. Is it made up of nitrogen and phosphorus and dirt, or is it sand or clay? How about the acidity or pH of the soil? Is it too acidic? Is it too basic? How about the amount of sunlight this plant would get? Is it in a shady region or is it in full sun? The amount of water. Is it somewhere where it gets watered a lot? Like here, we got nice water on the leaves, looking very clean. Or is it like in a desert where it gets very little water? And then last but not least, for that water, what about the drainage pattern? All five of these are examples of abiotic non-living factors. Well, an ideal habitat for one organism might not be ideal for another. So if we take a look at these two flowers, although they're both pink, the one on the right is a begonia, and it prefers to grow in the shade. The one on the left is a petunia. It loves fully sunny locations. If either of these got swapped, my petunias wouldn't flower this much and they probably would die off a little bit because they don't like the cooler, non sun locations. And my begonias would actually burn and they would start to turn brown because they truly do dislike the sun and they must be in the shade. Well, when we start looking at abiotic factors on life, one of the ones we tend to concentrate a lot on is water, because water is needed for a lot of biotic and also abiotic organisms. So we already know water is the universal solvent, or the solvent of life as we call it, because it is able to dissolve such a wide variety of chemicals. Things like nutrients or hazardous materials and other molecules can be transported great distances by water. Now we'll notice some of these are good, like nutrients, some of these are bad, like hazardous material. And even nutrients can be bad if we have too many. So let's take a look at a couple little examples and kind of compare this. So I have us here. This is a drought stricken area in Australia, or Defar or US, all these places that we have very poor water, or it struggles to get water. So these are in these places, we consider water a finite resource, meaning we could run out. If you think of in comparison to Canada, the average Canadian uses over 3,000 liters of water daily, where somebody in the sub-Saharan in Africa might only use 10 liters of water daily. Put this in perspective. If we use a low flow toilet at your house, for every flush, you're using approximately 4.5 liters of water. So you can see that in the sub-Saharan Africa, where it's a lot of sand and very little water, they can't waste water in this regards. So honestly, 2 flushes of the toilet in your household means they've used up their consumption of water for the day almost. Now, going from farmers' fields, let's go over to where we have rich soil. So let's go to a runoff from our farmer's field. So farmer's growing a crop like soybeans. He puts out fertilizer because he wants his soybeans to grow so big and strong. And so he has a lot to take to market 3 months, 4 months later. But what happens is if you over provide nutrients, you have all these nitrates and all these phosphates that leach into the soil, and they're not getting pulled up by the plants. If we could put on the perfect amount that they got pulled up by the plants, we wouldn't have a problem. But this extra gets washed away into gutters, get washed through the soil into underground rivers or lakes or oceans, and these guys and this extra nutrients make their way, and what they do is it stimulates rapid algae growth. Now, you would think, but this is a green thing. This is great. It's not great because this algae grows in the water. And so, with that, there's some pretty strong side effects. Side effect number one, because the algae grows so quickly on top with this extra nutrients of the water, it's going to block out all the sunlight from going into the body of water. Because the water is blocked from entering into the body of water, it's going to decrease the amount of oxygen in the water for other organisms like fish and insects, which need that oxygen in order for them to survive. Now, we can see here, these are your 5 Great Lakes. Okay, this down here is Lake Erie, and you can actually see in this shot the algae blooms. All of this, and this is a picture taken by a satellite in space, so that tells you how much there is that you can physically see it. This is due to the runoff of nitrates and phosphates, where it creates algae. The algae then dies over time, right? Because it has a lifespan and it's going to die and start to break down, increasing the decomposer population. Because the decomposers that's going to eat all this algae, their population increases. They're going to use up all the oxygen. Therefore, there's not going to be enough oxygen to support all the natural life that's in this lake, like fish, trout, salmon, all that sort of stuff. Our last slide is going to be looking at oil wells. So here's our oil well. We're going to drill in. We're going to take the oil out, right? We need some water to help pump out the oil. Oil floats on top. So if we pump water in there, right, the oil naturally comes up. So if we take a look, when oil wells are first drilled, pressure within the reserve brings the petroleum to the surface. So there's enough pressure underground that it's going to push it up naturally. However, eventually that pressure is going to drop. Therefore, we're going to take well water and we're going to pump it into these, creating a high pressure system that will allow the remaining oil and gas and petroleum products, crude oil, to come to the top where we can pull it. Okay, we call this process oil field injection. And it's not really light because ideally, right, if we're mixing oil and water, we are taking away from the cleanliness of our water or our pure water, and we are mixing it with a substance that does not want to mix very well with water, and it gets just kind of gross.